Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here, and in this video I just want to share the 6 books that I was able to finish for the Big Books of Summer reading event. This is an event created and hosted by Sue Jackson, who's been doing it online, both on YouTube and on her blog for over 10 years now, so that's pretty cool. When I heard about it, I decided I might as well join in. And I finished 6 books that meet the criteria of 400 pages or more, which I know isn't like that much, I guess, for a lot of people, especially if you read a lot of fiction and fantasy and all that kind of stuff. A lot of those are like door stoppers. But anyways, I thought it was pretty interesting. I got 3 history books and 3 science-ish books, and as well as my 2 current reads at the moment are both, I guess, would have qualified for big books, but I didn't quite finish them. But I'll talk about them briefly, and there's one of each of those as well. So let's just go ahead and get started. So first up is a buddy read I'm doing for my science reading challenge. I'll leave a link to that announcement. If you like science books, you should definitely check out the Discord, everything like that. But we got the Gene and Intimate History by Siddhartha Mukherjee, and we're doing a buddy read, and it's been going along pretty great. It's kind of like a blend of the hard science of genetics, DNA and the gene, how it's been discovered and all that, as well as kind of a history of like the science, like kind of a life in, maybe not life in times isn't the right word, but kind of like little vignette of biographies of the, a lot of the really kind of key characters in the discovery of it, starting with like Gregor Mendel, in the 1800s and stuff, all the way going through like Watson and Crick, discovering like kind of the double helix structure of DNA, everything like that. But I talk about this book and the next one a little bit more in another video, like as my current read, so I won't talk too much about them per se, but this one's going to be Polis, a new history of the ancient Greek city-state from the early Iron Age to the end of Antiquity by John Maw. This one's been a fabulous kind of just history of, the whole kind of chronology and history and concept of the Greek polis. He doesn't focus on just the really main big players that you always read about with like Athens, Sparta, Syracuse, Corinth. He goes into all these like little, kind of the more like run-of-the-mill real life place. There's like, I think, I can't remember, there's like around 11 or 1200 different city-states that have been discovered so far around the Mediterranean world. And a lot of them only had, from like 1,000 to a couple thousand citizens and individuals and stuff. So, they're not all like these giant megalopolises that you kind of like hear about and everything. But like I said, I talk a little bit more about that in another video as well. So let's get on to the ones that I actually finished. So we'll start with the science books. So first up, we have The Secret History of Sharks, The Rise of the Ocean's Most Fearsome Predators by John Long. This was a fantastic kind of secret lives, hidden lives book. I'm total trash for those, insert, plant or animal after, the secret life of. And I will probably get to it at some point. But yeah, this is an entire life history of, the entire taxa of like shark taxonomy, all the way from like before they were even actually classified as sharks, like 400 million years ago. So you kind of deal with proto sharks, going through every single like major age of the earth and everything. And of course I don't flip to any like pictures and stuff, but there's plenty of photographs, tons of illustrations, tons of diagrams of different teeth. That's a huge one, as you can tell. But you got like megalodons and everything as well. That's what I found pretty interesting. I didn't realize like just how close we were to megalodons, only being a couple million years ago. So that's pretty crazy if you really think about it. But a big thrust of the book is talking about how sharks have been able to adapt through all kinds of different conditions the earth and the marine environment has been able to throw out them. They survived pretty much every mass extinction event, and kind of the different changes they've kind of gone along the way to do so, all the way down to the modern times. So I found that really cool, and it's just pretty interesting learning how like tight knit the shark kind of science community is. It was just like nice too to see like how pretty much all of them, anytime they make a discovery, they always like name them after each other, and I thought that was just kind of like heartwarming. So because sometimes in some science groups, little niches, I guess, it can get pretty cutthroat from what I've read and everything. So it's kind of nice to actually see some good camaraderie going on there. Next up is Stephen Jay Gould's Dinosaur in a Haystack. And this is probably his most famous one besides Ever Since Darwin, as far as his collections of his serials and essays go. He wrote prolifically for Natural History, I want to say like Smithsonian, and maybe a couple other magazines and periodicals and things like that. And they've been collated, even during his lifetime, into lots of different just kind of essays. I think there's like 10 or a dozen or so different kind of collections of his, you know, like monthly columns and stuff. So I found these really interesting. Didn't quite like this one as much as the Ever Since Darwin, which is the first one in the series. But one really interesting one about this, he's a great science communicator, and that's his whole shtick, really. Even though he does a lot of like hard science, he's, you know, with the Bergast shell and everything, he was one of the main proponents and kind of a lead like authors of the concept of punctuated equilibrium in evolutionary speak, if you know what that is. But when he was the years of these periodicals were around the time Jurassic Park, the first one, came out in theaters in the early 90s. So there's a lot of essays sort of dealing with that kind of pop cultural event and everything. And I found that actually really cool, as well as the validation of, you know, the asteroid impact at the end of the Cretaceous period, where that was still kind of, you know, the late 80s and like early 90s. It was kind of like a little bit in the ether, just a little bit, but, you know, just the kind of like final nail in the coffin sort of discussions on that. And I guess I lied. I said I had 3 science books, but I guess I was thinking of the gene, because I got 4 history books and 2 science books, so forgive me. Next up, we got Fall of Civilization, Stories of Greatness and Decline by Paul Cooper. And what this is a collection of 14 different civilizations that the author talks about, that he had talked about on his podcast of the same name, which is, you know, probably why he wrote the book, and kind of their, you know, what led to their downfall, what led to their collapse. So if you like, you know, if you like the whole decline and fall shtick of like Gibbon and everything like that, you'll definitely enjoy this one. Each one is fairly independent. Like, you really, I think the author even sort of says, like in the prologue, you could read them out of order and it'd totally be fine. But I'll just read through like a couple of them. I do like how he has a mix of a bunch of different civilizations from around the world. It's not like super Eurocentric, for example. I don't know why I'm having a hard time finding the table of contents for whatever reason. But he does chronologically throughout the world. But for example, like Easter Island and kind of almost the modern age is talked about. You got lots of South American stuff with the Inca, the Aztecs, but you got things on the Indian subcontinent. And he picks a couple of the different ones for the Near East. It's not always like the big ones, like Assyria, for example, and Han China are taken into account, as well as like Byzantium, the Maya in South America for the Middle Ages. So I like how he did kind of go around the world and throughout time. One thing I do wish this book kind of dealt with a little bit more was having more of like an actual kind of like golden thread that tied everything together. There is like a conclusionary chapter, but it doesn't, like I said, like each one is so unique in a way, like, you know, they have all their own variables and whatnot, but there really wasn't much of a common thread uniting the chapters together, and I just feel like, you know, in a book this length, in the 500 pages or so, you kind of almost need that kind of unifying factor to make it just a little bit more readable, especially if you're kind of like just going through them like a normal book. Next up is this monster of a title here. We got the Enlightenment, The Pursuit of Happiness, 1680 to 1790 by Richie Robertson. And I did do this as a buddy read as part of the Historathon event. For those, you know, if you like history, there's also a Discord and a reading event known as Historathon as well. I'll leave links to that down below as well. And quarter 3 is all about the years 1500 to about 1820, and that's probably my weakest quarter. That definitely is my weakest quarter. Ancient civilizations I do really good. Medieval I'm pretty good. This quarter not so much, and then the modern age I've done a lot better in recent years. But yeah, I didn't know too much about it, but I kind of jumped on the bandwagon. Kind of got roped into it because everyone was like hyping this book up, and it definitely did not let me down. Like, I think it's about 800 pages of text or so, and then another like 200 pages of end matter. But the writer, the author, does a great job kind of doing the whole grand scope of just enlightenment and intellectual thought throughout this century. There's a little bit of like, you know, political narrative stuff, but the vast majority of the book is just kind of on ideas. Little vignettes of thinkers, different kind of concepts that were going around through different social classes at the time. Yeah, you know, for example, the second unit is all on the scientific revolution, so you got all the big names kind of going on there. And that was definitely like my favorite chapter, just because of like the stuff I like to read. But there's a ton of figures that I need to like start reading a lot more about. Like, I'm on the lookout. Probably going to read a biography of Denis Diderot next year for quarter 3, just because his work on I always knew him just as kind of like the guy that wrote the Encyclopedia, which is kind of like an Enlightenment, you know, just Encyclopedia Britannica, but for this time period and stuff. Super well regarded, had to go underground a little bit and stuff, but just the breadth and scope and the dedication and all that actually went into it really was quite awesome to like read about and everything. But yeah, highly recommend it if you like European culture and kind of like that early modern period. I definitely think you would like this. Like I said, it is a little bit of a brick, but it's definitely well worth it. I do think some chapters are a lot more fleshed out than others, but I think there's got to be, let's see, there's 14 bigger chapters, and each one has a bunch of like kind of like sub chapters. So there's got to be over 100. Probably around 100 like sub chapters on different topics all over the place. So yeah, just thoroughly enjoyed it, and I feel like I have a much better kind of understanding of Enlightenment culture at this point in time now. Next up, we got Alexander at the End of the World: The Forgotten Final Years of Alexander the Great by Rachel Kouser. Now, this one is pretty much it's about half biography of Alexander and about half kind of just more general political military narrative of his later campaigns. I do like how the book sort of starts after the Persian Empire has essentially fallen. That's kind of where you're starting off, and that's usually what a lot of Alexander stuff that you read about, that's definitely the big focus. You know, it's on the invasion of Asia, you know, the Battle of Gaugamela and everything like that, and the taking of Persepolis. But that's kind of just the starting point on this one. And I think, you know, his later campaigns in Afghanistan, in India, and the return journeys and stuff definitely don't get talked about as much. And I'm not a big military kind of history reader per se, but I do feel like that part of the book was really well done. Now, her character profile of Alexander, on the other hand, I was a little less sold on. She does a great job kind of deflecting pretty much all the bad things that Alexander sort of did and his kind of bad decisions and stuff. And I will like die on this hill, you know, the march through the Gadrosian desert and stuff in the Maghreb. More Macedonians died during that march through the desert, which even she kind of admitted was kind of unnecessary. Really didn't have to happen. More Macedonians died during that march than probably all the other major battles that he fought, like kind of put together and stuff, if that tells you anything. And that fact is kind of glossed over a little bit. I don't think it's like super explicit. But for example, she does like damage control when he murders Clitus the Black, who was a Macedonian, a higher-ranking Macedonian that did save Alexander's life in combat in a battle. But you know, as the Macedonians were wont to do, they have giant feasts, giant banquets, where most of them get drunk and wasted and everything. And you know, Clitus is grumbling, kind of like, you know, being like an old head and everything. Alexander gets angry and, you know, runs him through with a spear. You know, and she kind of is like, well, you know, that was bad, but, you know, he kind of propitiated the gods and everything, and everyone was cool with it afterwards, so it wasn't like that big a deal. Like, you know, the assassination of Parmenion kind of gets glossed over a little bit. It's just and then there's one incident, for example, where Alexander's besieging a castle or fortress in Afghanistan. It's going not great, you know, he's definitely going to win, but it's taking too long and all that kind of stuff is going on. Eventually, the city agrees to surrender. The mercenaries that are defending the city are left to kind of leave under the white flag, under arms and stuff, and just, you know, evacuate and all that, which they do. Then the queen comes out and, you know, basically subjects herself to Alexander and everything, and he just kind of lets her be like a vassal. Everything's all fine and dandy, you know, it's like a win-win-win for everyone, except like later that night, as the mercenaries are just like kind of camped like away, he just kind of like ambushes them and kills them all. And he's just like, the author doesn't even really kind of address that as like, you know, a flaw or bad or anything. It's just like kind of just stated, and there's no like condemnation really. And I'm just like, anyways, I feel like I rambled on enough about this. Like, so if you like Alexander the Great, I know he's a polarizing figure. Like, all people either love him or hate him. If you like him, you'll probably like this book. If you don't like him, you know, you can still actually get a lot out of it. So I think in that regard, it redeems itself a little bit. Just know that going into it, I suppose. And then lastly is a book that I've done a specific review of, and it's Ravenna, Capital of Empire, Crucible of Europe by Judith Herron. And this one was fantastic. This is a history. I love late antiquity, which is roughly now 300 to 800 or so in the kind of Mediterranean world. And this is sort of a history of about that time period through the lens of Ravenna, which for those who don't know, that was a capital of the Roman Empire, kind of like during its last century and a half or so. Rome was kind of backsliding and just, wasn't kind of what it used to be. And Ravenna was just a more defensible and just kind of like a better location, central hub for the West. But you get lots of different profiles, like for example, Aetius and Stilicho, some of my favorite Romans, especially during like the later period, are talked about quite a bit. You got lots of interesting figures too, like Galla Placidia talked about a lot, who was a pretty crazy empress. You should definitely look her up if you don't know. But it does a great job too. The book does a great job kind of doing the political, military, historical narrative, as well as tons of different cultural stuff for kind of the early Middle Ages, late antiquity. I just find it really fascinating. Like I said, it's just a really cool lens to look at history. And Ravenna is quite well known for its art, for its sculpture, for its mosaics, everything like that. So definitely check it out if you enjoy the early Middle Ages, you enjoy kind of like the late Roman Empire and everything, which was quite different from the Principate period and all that. But yeah, just a really well done history, and it does a great job kind of, like I said, talking about the cultural stuff. Not even just the art too, like all the kind of the religious tension that was going on. This is the era where all the different kind of subsects of Christendom were starting to like really kind of start separating apart and everything, and stuff like that. But yeah, I found it really interesting, and if you want to see the full video review, I'll leave a link to that as well. So there you have it. Those were the 6 books plus the 2 books that I'm still kind of in the middle of, that I didn't quite get to, that I've read this summer for Big Books of Summer. I really enjoyed it. I think this year I've been trying to consciously like read longer books, read things a little bit more out of my comfort zone. Maybe not so much with these like selections and stuff, but in some of my other videos I kind of talked about that a bit as well. So let me know what the latest long book that you've read down below. I'd be interested to see if you liked it or not. But always remember, whether you're reading long books or not, read victoriously.